So welcome everyone. My name is Tiara. I've been at HireEasy for almost 2 years now. Time flies, but really focused on the non-technical recruiting here. It's been an amazing journey just to meet just amazing people just across the U.S. We're a diverse remote team, so it's been amazing to meet a lot of different backgrounds. So with that said, I'll pass it to Vivian.
Hi everyone, I'm Vivian. I've been with HireEasy for about a year and a half. So I mainly focus on expanding and growing our R&D functions, so engineering and product. So I am a full cycle recruiter here. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I am looking forward to share my experience with you, of course, hoping to learn from each other.
Some people are early on in their TA journey who are joining us. Some people are a little bit more experienced, but it's always good to just get a broad-based understanding of what we'll be talking about today. Why don't both of you go into sort of the different functions that we want to identify and sort of talk about outbound recruiting a little bit before we start today's discussion.
Of course. I can go ahead and get started. So I mentioned that my function at HiEC is a full stack recruiter, focusing on technical recruiting. But in general, when it comes to recruiting, I would like to say, well, when it comes to job search, right, the main functions I would say are sourcer and recruiters. Of course, we have recruiting coordinators, but for the purpose of this webinar, we're focusing more on like the recruitment side. I'm going to talk more about the sourcer and the recruiters. So for sourcers, it really depends on the companies. So each company could have a different definition for sourcer. So sourcers generally, though, their responsibilities range from gathering requirements, searching for candidates, engaging with them, and then also having phone screens with them. Some company even have their sources take care of the on-site slash face-to-face interview before they hand the candidates off to a recruiter to take care of the offer stage. And of course, when it comes to the recruiters' main responsibilities are phone screens, like screening the candidates, mostly inbound. And of course, sometimes it depends on how they collaborate with the sourcer. Sourcer can also pass on some candidates to the recruiter to screen, and then of course to take care of any of like the face-to-face communication between the candidates and the internal stakeholders, and lastly, offer and negotiation. So these are the functions for recruiters, and of course for a full cycle recruiter like me, do everything from gathering requirements all the way to closing the candidates. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of the difference between sourcer and recruiter.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, Vivian. And she did mention inbound, right? So I do want to talk about a little bit about the inbound and outbound recruiting too, as well. So it's probably a new topic, what exactly is inbound and outbound? And I think now that we know a different variety of responsibilities between sourcers and recruiters, more focus on the inbound, it's more of the traditional route that you think of, right? So, people are applying, people are reaching out to companies asking about their interests, and this could be done between LinkedIn, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, all of those different job boards, even just directly on a career page. Now, so Vivian did mention full cycle recruiter, and part of being a full cycle recruiter is also the outbound aspect. So I would say that's a lot more on the proactive side, where recruiters are just being a little bit more about actually reaching out to great talent, right? So they're not depending on just the applicants alone. They want to, get to talent first, and these could be passive talents as well. So a big emphasis on jobs finding people, and I think that's accomplished, between networking, creating these passive pipelines, recruiters doing the sourcing as well, and utilizing different tools to get to that.
there are any questions about that, they'll be happy to answer. But I think, as we were talking about our discussions of what actually makes a successful outbound recruiting engagement expert, we wanted to identify a couple of topics and buckets that people can think about when they're thinking about engagement, right? So Tiara, I actually want to start with you. What are some buckets that you've identified for being a successful, engagement expert, and are there any stories you can tell in that arena?
Yeah, of course. So I think for this webinar, I did want to focus on two areas of what I think is important of being an outbound engagement recruiter. So of course, there's a lot of different areas, but would love to focus on understanding your audience and storytelling to land the candidate. So to kick things off, understanding your audience. So for instance, let's say, you have an exciting opportunity to work on a brand new role. This is a role that maybe you actually haven't had experience recruiting before. So what happens, after meeting with your hiring manager? That could be as brief as a 15-minute meeting, and that might not be enough for you to really understand the role. So I think, encouraging yourself to do a lot more research on the particular role can really impact your engagement too as well. I think, by doing this research, you get to know the market, you're becoming more informative to your hiring managers. You can tell them about the landscape and maybe even cultivate your approach as a recruiter and how your team approaches as well. So would love to share a success story here in HireEasy. So I was actually working with the CRO and we were looking for a senior director of customer success. So the first thing I actually did was, shameless plug here, I dove into HireEasy Insights and I input, what we discussed about the qualifications and was able to see a little bit more about the market. So luckily, we are a remote first company here at HireEasy. So that did expand my pool. After plugging everything in, I got about 9% of folks who are in a customer success role are actually sitting in a director position in computer software in the US. So that's actually a pretty small number. So now imagine if I had to even shrink that a little bit more, if I wanted to find someone on site, right? So San Francisco, for instance, that would make that percentage even lower. So what does that mean for how I'm going to engage is that, one, it's a highly competitive role, right? So supply is low, demand is high. I can set goals for myself on engagement, how much I want to reach out to XYZ candidates within a day, within a week, based on that particular number too as well. And because this is a little bit more of a higher level role, I can prepare myself and my team for maybe crucial questions or topics that might pop up, during the interview process. And I think that really is all tying back into engagement. It's just being prepared and ready. Ways for me to do research and understand my audience too is studying different profiles, even if I'm not reaching out to them. Study internally how that team is functioning and leveraging different networks as well. So all of that ties together to understanding my audience so that my engagement is a little bit stronger too. So going back to the success story here, that we do have that senior director with us now. His name is Chris Vidola. And I think what was really great about the interaction between Chris Vidola is that we all knew on the recruiting team who our audience was. So, from starting my initial outreach email, I was very to the point. I think I was, telling him what exactly we're aiming for. So I was telling him it's a leading second line manager role, relating the company and our mission to, maybe relative trends, why this role was pivotal. And I actually got a response after one message. And I know that's not always the case. So you can always try different methods, but it was exciting to see that I was able to give him all the information he needed within that message to say okay, this might be a nice shot. I did actually reach out to him and I was like, hey, you're here now. So let me know the details. Why did you actually respond to me? Of course, he was saying, it was nice that it wasn't a bot email or maybe felt like an automated email, or it wasn't even on LinkedIn. It was directly to his email. It was personalized. And he mentioned that it felt a lot more targeted to himself, and that that he can bring value. Part of that messaging too is that I did mention, I was partnering with our CRO too as well. And he said that it felt great to know that, this was a partnership and how important the role was, that the recruiting team had a strong relationship with the internal team as well. So yeah, do you want to take a quick pause there before I go into my second topic? But kind of felt like that was a lot.
Are there any questions about that or any comments about sort of that particular use case and even just understanding your audience in general? Well, thanks so much, Amy. Amy said, great example, and love the retro on it with the employee. Yeah, Tierra has a good success record of getting good higher easy employees. We actually have a blog on our website, and I'll link it later today, about Tierra recruiting one of our growth enablement managers. So, and it's also great to see that, and Tierra, let me know how this is maybe evolved in your function, sort of the approach of actually getting feedback from once you've hired someone, because it could be very easy once Chris is already hired by the company to just leave it alone and move on to the next task, right? But, how did that process develop of like actually getting feedback and actioning on that? Because I think that's critical here.
Actually, that's a great point, Kunwar. And I think that's something that, our recruiting team does practice, is that, we want to consistently learn on what works and what doesn't. And that, I feel like that can go beyond just, you actually doing outbound recruiting, but understanding and connecting with your talent once they're here too, right? So I think retaining talent is also, understanding, how are you doing? Now that you're here, is this, what you expected? Did we do a great job during the interview process? And again, I think that is the engagement part, is that we're, providing the information, because, we are reaching out to these people. They did not imply the initial interest, right? So we want to make sure that we gave them the information.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, there's no questions. I'd love to ramble a little bit more and share my second topic, which is storytelling. So again, just to reiterate, I think outbound engagement does go beyond initial traction and interest. I think it needs to continue to be emotionally engaging for candidates. Again, we reached out to them. So, we want to make sure that their interest level is there. And that, we're making sure that we're being engaging with them as well. So these candidates may not know anything about your company. So you can share them, of course, your career page, the job description, and, that might not be enough for them to know, why am I a good fit for the company? And why is this company a good fit for me? So I think storytelling, having those stories ready and prepared to share with your candidates, it creates personalization. You can demonstrate, your passion as a recruiter, or even your hiring team members for the company, by actually sharing these POVs, these stories. And I think they're great examples of why the candidate or why the candidate should believe in you. I can say, we have a great company culture, we do so many fun projects, but how can they believe you with just that statement? So being able to share some success stories of how the company is continuing to improve can definitely give them a reason to believe, that's actually happening. I think part of storytelling is also coming from the candidate. So, as a recruiter or the hiring team, just being, an active listener and researching is part of the engagement as well. What does their profile share about them, and what can I appropriately mention? And can it lead to a success story that they want to share too? So, for instance, if you're in a phone screen, you may not have their resume. So maybe you can share these real stories to address their interests, their concerns. But it also opens the floor for the candidate themselves, to share more stories of their own. And I think that's a great way to, have an interview process feel a lot more organic and natural, is to share stories amongst each other. So, that could range between, the company founding story, why are we all here, ownership, opportunity stories, mission stories. And I think a huge important one is why people are staying. So being able to share stories maybe of your tenured employees who've made milestones. So going back to Chris Vidola, so again, he's the Senior Director of Customer Success here now. During his interview process, we made sure that the whole entire hiring team, not just the recruiters, were being tentative, prompt, and genuinely curious throughout his process. They shared a lot of their stories about, how they got to where they are, why they chose to be here. I believe our CRO just shared with him as well, just, what brought him from being at his previous company after many, many years into Hire Easy, and why it was just such an exciting opportunity that the candidate can join too as well. So I think sharing stories can also contribute to transparency, right? So you can say stories where, of course, it wasn't always the best of times, but, the team worked together to get through all of that. And I feel like with that transparency, it just feels a lot more, reassuring that, when times get tough, the team is here to get to that main goal. So I think providing those stories, again, is part of the engagement aspect, and helps, the candidates make a lot more of an informed decision. So again, I feel like I was rambling, but I do want to just say some key takeaways from that. So I think, again, these are passive candidates that we reached out to. And, again, it goes beyond the initial engagement. So I think just being creative, consistent, doing your research, learn from trial and error, and also talking to coworkers from different departments. This kind of relates back to your question, Kunwar, where you're like, how did I learn to engage a little bit better from talent that actually who joined us today? And I think that's, being able to talk to different people within your company and getting those testimonies and real stories. So I think as a recruiter, it is, kind of our responsibility to advise our hiring teams on the best ways to attract talent. And again, understanding your audience and as well as storytelling is great ways to attract talent.
Thank you so much, Tiara. Do we have any questions coming in from the chat? I mean, all that information is awesome. I did want to highlight a question that actually, yeah, Eduardo, testimonials can definitely make a difference. I wanted to highlight a question that actually came in through the chat. They said all this info is great, so thank you to the anonymous attendee that said that. They're asking if there are going to be any takeaway documents or any collateral that's coming afterwards. There absolutely will be. So you will have access to the webinar recording and all this information, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth at the end, will be available in the form of courses at our Outbound Recruiting Academy, where we'll be teaching all the different sections and fundamentals of outbound recruiting. So I will link that as well towards the end. And we're going to be putting some more materials together like blogs and collateral. So we'll definitely keep everyone who attended this webinar in the know of all that information. But thank you for asking that question. Let's see if we have any more questions coming in. I think Dan Smith, Tiara, do you see Dan Smith's question?
Hey, Dan, looks like you said, do you have a why to join our company site and any tips for what to include there? So great question. I would say it really depends on the situation too. So let's say, you are an initial phone screen, you're speaking with the candidate and they ask you that question. I think a great way to do that is to listen to them actually instead. Ask them what they're looking for. And then, relay those again back, those stories to why they should join. So let's say, I'm looking for a place that gives me ownership. I can say here at Hire Easy that a lot of our employees, get great opportunities to work on XYZ. And because of that, XYZ happened. So I think that's a great way to utilize this use case is having those ready so that you can actually answer what they're looking for rather than saying this is why you should join. So in that case, when you already had engaged with the candidate, I think that's the best approach. But let's say let's say if it's a cold email, you're doing outbound emails. I would say depending on the candidate, I think also just understanding your audience again, looking into, what they've accomplished. So let's say, I'm looking to recruit someone with who's interested in XYZ, and they've already done that at XYZ company. So, maybe I can use that in my engagement and say like, are you looking to, be able to accomplish, this within your next role? That's something I could include in my outbound engagement too as well.
Yeah, Tiara, I absolutely love that, especially the listening piece. I think this is something we've talked about, especially behind the scenes, that a lot of times when you're the one asking questions and trying to get information out of a candidate, it can be very easy to just not listen to what they have to say. And I think if you do listen, you're able to actually use that to inform whether, there'd be a synergy there between your company and their expectations and, all those sort of things. So I think that's definitely valuable insight. And
Yeah.
I think Evelyn has a question as well, if you're able to see it.
Yeah. So Evelyn, what is the best way to identify a person's persona in order to customize messaging to them? Great question. So whether it's, within HireEasy itself or LinkedIn, I think there's a lot of things that you can identify through maybe their their biography, or maybe if they have accomplishments that they put into their current role. Let's say, they are an account manager and they hit quota the last few quarters. You can maybe use that into your messaging, saying like, you have been very successful, and then this is a solution that you can be successful too as well. So I think just keywords within maybe someone's profile is a great way. Also, understanding, maybe where they came from. Let's say that they're also from a startup too. So if you want to engage with them, saying, this is a great opportunity for you to also, again, have ownership, a great innovative product. It's exciting to get behind. So those are different things that you can identify in their profile. But of course, there's a million other ways. So I think just really looking into your audience, sometimes less is more. So.
If anybody has any others, we'll wait another minute before we shoot over to Vivian. But Tiara, as always, that was incredibly valuable insight.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for your questions.
See, this is where the music would be valuable. The waiting time is.
Yeah, the Slack music just comes into my mind when you said that.
I know. I have to say though, like the Slack pings have now given me PTSD. I don't know about anybody else or anything else, but anytime I hear a ping, I start freaking out. Go ahead. Sorry.
I actually changed the Slack sound to spice it up. You can change like the different, like just like a ringtone, just so that like I'm not cognitive to it. So.
You can change the sound?
Yeah.
Okay, I know what I'm doing after this.
Don't go too crazy.
I definitely need to change it. It's been too much. Oh, we actually got 2 more questions coming. Perfect. So first one from Glenda. Tiara, if you can see them.
Okay, so Glenda, what about if we are recruiting for another company, staffing, any ideas? So Glenda, I actually have a very brief period in my career where I was at a staffing industry, and I know that there's some rules with how you message. Of course, sometimes certain staffing firms don't want to identify the company that you're working for because of that. Sometimes there's I believe, there's like a contract or something where, if the candidate applies within, then it's not the staffing company can't use that candidate. So I know that's where things get tricky, where you don't want to overshare, but I think you could take the same approach, without saying the company's name, identifying, keywords into their profile, what they've accomplished. We can identify the client. Okay. So Glenda, I think it's, you can approach it the same way. It's all about who you're reaching out to. And, regardless if you're a staffing company or not, it's all about, what the candidate is looking for in their career and what they want to accomplish. So really listening to what they want. If it's, coming into their profile and starting from there. It's just identifying, what they've accomplished. Maybe, there's like keywords in their biography where they might be interested in, or you could take a fun approach where someone's like, I like to play with my dog on the weekends. Maybe you can tie that into your messaging as well. Just ways that you can differentiate yourself, but also seem like you're catering to them in particular. It always makes someone feels good. So that's the way I would approach. But again, I wish I had more staffing experience to share with you, Glenda, but I think that's the best way I would respond to.
So I actually have a little bit more experience in staffing. So not sure how your clients is open to it, but you can always reach out to the hiring manager and say, hey, if you were to sell your company, how would you sell it? Like if you were to sell this role, how would you sell it? And then tell them to write a blurb, like 1 to 2 sentences, don't have to be really long. It really helps you to understand their team culture and company culture as well. It's really in that discovery phase, right? So like you look up the company. So for example, if you see that this is a high growth company like a startup and they have lots of funding, I mean, those are the things that you can put on the outreach email to attract candidates. But of course, there's some intangible things that you cannot find on the internet. Those are the ones that you have to ask the clients.
Yes, I think Robbie asked a question. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name properly. I apologize if I'm not. How do we negotiate with candidates when they're holding multiple offers and are not able to decide on which firm to join?
It may sound like a broken record, but I think it really is about understanding what your candidate is looking for. I think when we're attracting talent, we want to make sure that this is, a best fit for them. So we don't want them to come in and, this is not what they're looking for. And, the retention may be lost within a few months. So I think, asking the questions, just being able to make sure that you have a solid answer from them and just being able to revisit them. I think part of engagement is, beyond the steps, having maybe like closing calls between different interviews with them is a great way to understand, what they're looking for. Like, is there something that, the hiring manager maybe missed out in the interview that you're still curious about? Maybe we can get that answer for you. So I think it can start from the very beginning of the interview process and engaging the candidate to see their interests. But Vivian, do you have any add-ons to that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Tiara. So, something to add here is one of the things that one of the candidates told me the reason why I went with your offer versus the other companies and yours is not the highest is because you show me your culture throughout the interview process. So the interview process, we require everyone, all hands on deck, to really show who we are, show and tell, right? This is the time that the candidate's gonna learn about our culture, learn about the team. So this is the time that we show them who we are. So throughout the interview process, of course, the closing call, like the recruiters, us, giving them the attention is important, but at the same time, we need to be sure that the hiring like the interviewers are trained. They are doing all of the best practices. They know how to sell their how to tell the candidates about their team culture and what they're looking for, and then to help the candidates understand, oh, okay, yeah, what they have, it matches with what I'm looking for, because at the end of the day, the candidate is also interviewing us as well.
Yeah, that's so true. And Vivian, I'm sort of pushing you into telling the story because I love it so much. But can you talk to the audience sort of about one of the tactics you use to actually increase your offer acceptance rate? I remember you talked about sort of how phone calls played a role in that. And I think that's actually valuable for this question.
Right. Well, actually, I have a story to share. Do you want me to,
Oh,
share that in the story instead?
absolutely. Yeah, go for it.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, so well, buckle up everyone. So my approach is I'm more of like a data-driven person. It probably kind of tells a little, like tells from my job title because I'm a technical recruiter. I'm not in tech, but I do have a great interest in tech. And when it comes to data, definitely love to play around with it. So Tiara mentioned that throughout the interview process, she sets goals. Um, I mean, to me, those are the metrics. And then when it comes to the hiring process, metrics, engagement, um, and then also candidate's journey are essential to our success. So I want to share your experience on how they help me with my recruiting process. So firstly, I just want to mention that I really like to use data to analyze my performance and I identify the strengths and weaknesses in my hiring process. So when it comes to engagement, I like to send sequences. So instead of just sending one email, of course, it really depends on if you have the tools or not. But before, when I didn't have the tool, I could only send one email. But now I do have the tool, then of course I would always go for the sequence option. And then sequence are pretty much like a set of pre-scheduled emails are sent out one after the other if the candidates didn't don't reply. And then I use something called the A/B testing to test my sequences to make sure that they are efficient, right? So and my KPI here is the reply rates. That's an indicator for me to look at to see whether or not my sequence is working. So we all know that we need to personalize in an engagement message, and Tiara talked about that earlier. But there's no formula to this, right? She said you have to try different methods to get to that perfect perfect email. And we just have to try many times in order to find that best engagement email for the role that you're recruiting for that yields the highest reply rates. Now, after the engagement part, I like to provide a high touch hiring process. So the candidate journey is very important. So to mention, the candidate journey is also part of the reason why a candidate would accept the offer, even though, maybe the total compensation is not, it's not comparable to the competitor, but the candidate journey helps with that. So, so it really sets the tone for the company's culture, and also increase the chance of winning the candidates from the competitor. My metrics usually for this is source to interview conversion rates and offer acceptance rates. Those are the two metrics that I look at to evaluate my candidate's journey. Um, so no matter what it is, you know, after each interview that the candidates have, I would set up a 15 minutes follow-up call with them to talk about to confirm their interest in the role, because after they speak with the team member, they're going to learn a lot more and they can decide a little bit more whether or not this is the right opportunity for them. And then I would also provide the feedback. I'm not afraid to provide the feedback to my candidates. Like a lot of times people would say, oh, yeah, we just want to provide feedback at a high level and just say, oh yeah, we hire someone internally, or there's someone there's someone who's a better fit than you are. Something high level like this. But for me, rather, I look at the feedback and really break it down to them and see what areas that they can improve on. And I can tell you this, they really appreciate it when you do this. And it's not going to get you into trouble because you are really focusing on only like the objectives, like the interview itself, like the experience, the job. So this is really something that we shouldn't be afraid of doing, providing feedback. And then of course, if they pass the interview, they advance to the next round, then we prepare them for it. Um, so to some people, it may be time consuming to do this, especially in like a high volume environment. But think about how much time you can save from your end and the hiring teams and by doing this, and also increase the acceptance rate. So at the end of the day, it all pays off, right? So I wonder, how many of you have ever struggled to fill the role here? Anyone? because the story that I'm going to share is one of my failure. um, but I will also tell you how I turned that around by using metrics. So here how it goes. So about a year and a half ago, I first joined the company. My first task was to recruit a product manager. So keep in mind that this is the first in-house role that I've been in. Before that, it was all staffing agency, so there's definitely a learning curve for me. So first, um, after I get the request, I went to the hiring manager, I gathered the requirement, and then I went on with my search. So the search went for went on for like 5 months. It's a long time, but we couldn't hire anyone. So yeah, that was not good. Eventually, the role was actually put on hold due to a reorganization and a restructure in the department. So a few months later, the role opened again. And then this time, I analyzed everything that I did in that 5 month search and see what went wrong. So here are my metrics. So I reached out to almost 700 candidates. My reply rate was about 16%. So that 16% includes both interested and non-interested replies. And then, I mean, the 16% to me is decent, but of course there's still room for improvements. And then we had 16 outbound candidates. So those were like the people I reach out to, passive candidates interview for the first round. So 11 of the 16 actually passed the interview, but they withdrew the application. And then two of them didn't pass. And then we had two actually got to the offer stage, but they declined the offer one after the other. Um, yeah, it sounds like a nightmare. And it was. And then so I just analyzed the data, right? And I found the issues. So here over the issues. So one, um the interview, the first interview was not competitive enough. So considering 11 out of the 16 candidates who passed the interview, that's telling me that the pass rate is too high for the first round. We really need to make it more competitive in order to have the hiring process to be more efficient. Two, so the second round was supposed to be a take-home project, and the take-home project was not a good idea in a competitive market. As we know, a year ago, the market is just so crazy, super competitive. So in a competitive markets like this, you're telling a passive candidate to do a big take-home project that's pretty time-consuming. They're going to say no. Um, and then the other thing was I realized that the team, the interviewers, there were lack of training when it comes to interviewing. So didn't really know like the best practices in interviewing and didn't really have a well organized interview process. Like interviewers didn't know what the previous interviewer covered, and they had to ask this question like, oh, like what other areas that I need to cover in this round, right? This question should not come up in the first place. Um, and then lastly, we were just too desperate to get someone because you know it was a competitive market again, and then we just really focusing on like, okay, yeah, we just want someone who's really good technically, but we fail to realize that like we still need to evaluate their interest in the role after each stage. um so those were my foundings. And then after that, what did I do? So I did some research, and then so I didn't really have a manager to learn from, or so what I did was I went online, did some research, did some training. I actually went to LinkedIn Learning Academy. Well, now we have the Outbound Recruiting Academy, so more resources to learn from. But I went to LinkedIn Learning Academy and took some courses, and then I make the following changes. One, When it comes to engagement, right? I wasn't afraid to add one more follow-up. So before, my sequence was one touch up, like one first touch and then one follow-up, so 2 emails. But I found that even I add one more, it would still be okay. But anything more than that, I feel like it's a stretch because it make the candidates feel like it's like a spam. So I added one more, just one more can go a long way. And then I started to personalize the email a little bit more by adding some of the variables, highlighting the benefits. On work, like to work at our company. I even include a salary range in the engagement email. No, that was before the California transparency law. I just found that sometimes it does increase the reply rates. And then it also helps me to gather market data. If most of the people is telling me like, oh, your range is actually below my expectation. If I have like 10 people telling me that, I think there's something that we need to do there, right? To improve the salary range. Now, secondly, I also work with the hiring manager to set up a comprehensive hiring guide to lay out each interview focus areas and also making sure that the interviewers know what they need to cover in each interview. And then I did an interviewer training for all of the interviewers in the R&D departments for about on the interview best practices. Because believe it or not, a lot of the things like, do not answer a phone call while you're interviewing with the candidates. It seems like, it's like a normal thing to do, common sense, but sometimes, it could still happen. And it did happen, unfortunately. I did get feedback from candidates that happened. So having a training can really help the interviewers to understand what comes into um, like the etiquette to interview candidates to increase our chance to win the candidates over, right? And it's also showing our culture too. So lastly, it's follow up with the candidates after each interview. So I normally ask 2 questions in the follow up email. So, sorry, not the email, the call. One is to ask them from scale 1 to 10, how interested they are in this opportunity after they speak with the team member. So 10, as if you get the offer now, you would accept it. And then for me, anything less than 7, we really need to reassess the situation and even recommend the candidates not to move forward. And then anything above 7, for any of the missing points, I ask, what's missing? They would tell me what's missing. If it's something that we can change right away, then we can still or accommodate, then we can still move forward in the hiring process. However, if it's something that we cannot change right now and it's absolutely critical to the candidates, then in that case we just set the record straight and say, hey, we know you're expecting this, but this is not something that we can change quickly. Is it something that you're still open to? If not, we can stay in touch until um, we make these changes, and then we can reconnect again. So that's the first question I asked. The second question is if there's any updates since the last time we spoke. So some of the candidate, they interview the first interview, and then the second one is like a week later. A lot of things can happen in a week, especially in a competitive market. So you have to ask them if there's any updates, if they have any competing offers, any offer deadlines or last round of interviews. So we know what they have on their plates. Okay. So after I make these changes in my second try, we hire someone in 4 weeks. 5 months of not hiring someone to hiring someone in 4 weeks. That's a great improvement here. So my reply rate went from 16% to 18%. So that's about a 2% increase. So it's not, it's a little bit, but it's still better than 16, right? 18 is still better than 16. And then offer acceptance rates, of course, was 0 the first try in the first try, and then now it's 100%. So that was the first candidates that we gave an offer to and accepted it right away. So 0 to 100. And then I also adapted the workflow for all of the roles. So these practices didn't only improve our hiring process, but also enhance the candidate's experience and really, confirm the saying of show and tell in the hiring process. So I even had a candidate telling me that, I was the best recruiter that they've ever worked with. But it really surprised me a little because when I was doing all these things, I felt like it was pretty, it wasn't a lot on my end. And to me, it's like, okay, yeah, it's just giving you a call, prepping you for the next interview is something that I could do and I should do. And but to them, it feels like a world of difference because they may not get this treatment from the other recruiters that they worked with before. So that's also what sets you aside from like the other recruiters, right? Um, so at the end of the day, from analyzing the data and tackling the issues, it definitely took some learning curves. So I have to say, thanks to the internet and all of the resources out there nowadays, we can just learn new things at the tip of our fingertips. So I, went to LinkedIn Learning Academy. Now we have Hire Easy Outbound Recruiting. There are many, many of these resources out there that we can learn from. We can definitely, use what we have, look at the metrics, analyze what we're doing well, what do we need to improve on, and then take what we learn into practice and keep doing it, like making it better and better. So that's the story what I wanna share with you. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, of course, Vivian. Thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible and always puts a smile on my face when I see the 0 to 100. So I think it's really valuable. And I think there's a common thread between, I think, both of the stories you guys shared, right? There's a collaborative nature to what you guys are doing. In Tiara's story, obviously there's data involved, but you told more of a story about how you're actually collaborating with different stakeholders, whether that's a CRO or someone else. And Vivian, in your case, you're using data as a collaborative partner to actually inform what your decisions are going to be, where maybe mistakes are happening and where improvements could be made. So I think there's a really cool thread of like collaboration that's going through both of your processes and that make up an actual successful outbound recruiter. So thank you both so much for sharing. If there are any questions for Vivian or Tiara in terms of anything they've shared, whether it's metrics or otherwise, we'd love to have them. Vivian, we actually had a question super early in your presentation that we weren't able to get to, but Kari wanted to ask, what tool do you use for the sequenced emails that you sent?
That's a great question. I use Hire Easy. Before Hire Easy, I was just sending one email. It was very manual, and there was no way that I could keep track of like who I reach out to and didn't respond before I started using Hire Easy. So it's an amazing tool.
Awesome. And Vivian, what do you use as your email provider, just so they know what it integrates with? So do you use Gmail or Outlook?
I use Gmail.
Awesome.
hmm
Thank you guys so much for attending. Obviously, if you have any questions that come in, we will be sending a webinar recording follow-up along with some other materials like some blogs and as well as a link to the Outbound Recruiting Academy that was mentioned a couple of times. So that's a place where we're trying to consolidate sort of all the fundamentals and skills that you need as a TA professional to grow within your profession. So far, we've introduced our introductory courses for outbound recruiting just to give you a feel and an understanding of what the category actually means. Our next release is going to be engagement next week. So a lot of the content that you actually saw at this webinar will be covered within those courses. It's a great opportunity to learn. And it's also a great opportunity to connect with other TA professionals who are learning those same skills in the way Vivian was able to learn them, on the internet, the awesome internet. So we will be sending that link as well to the Outbound Recruiting Academy. As always, you can connect with Tiara and Vivian. They're pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, but we can send that information in the follow-ups as well. If you have any just general questions or want to share, you finally figured out what song you guys like listening to and you can send it to them as well. But thank you everyone so much for joining, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much, Tiara, Vivian.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.